There's never been a CTO in the United States before, and the good news is the administration understands that technology and IT is not a department, that it is actually an enabler to getting things done. And Aneesh has a terrific responsibility in that regard. So let me thank you right up front. So.
Thank you. Oh, nothing of the sort.
There's never been a CTO in the United States. So how'd you get the job?
That I don't know the answer for. I still don't. So the history of the job comes back to the campaign when the president had been visiting with the Valley, and he'd been asking a very fundamental question. Historically in Washington, technology had been a box unto itself. So there's a Department of Health policy, a Department of Energy policy. Technology policy largely came out of the FCC for telecommunications issues, and then as the internet became an increasingly important part of our economic engine, there had been a lot of conversation about internet policy. What the president understood early was that technology is increasingly becoming a change agent to transform the nation's healthcare system, educational system, our energy system, and he wanted an opportunity to have someone take a cross-cutting look at those opportunities, and that's the role that I sit in today.
So how would you both describe what you do generally, and then follow on to that, because people here care a lot about these kinds of things. How at the end of the day would you measure what you do?
Well, let me begin by answering the question in 3 parts.
Okay.
So there's a substantive question. So what are the areas that we're focused on? There we have 5 key priorities. The first of those priorities, the president announced in the State of the Union, is part of our strategy to out-innovate, out-compete, out-educate the world. He included an out-build component to that strategy, and he unveiled a wireless initiative. We see the future on mobility, not the tagline on the Motorola new headline, but we see mobility as a key engine of economic growth, the 3rd wave of innovation. So we announced what is now an $18 billion initiative that actually pays down the deficit because we're using spectrum auctions. We'll get into content in a minute, but wireless is a major thrust of our strategy. The second piece is what we call Startup America, which is trying to understand from all of you, what are the ways in which we're kind of stifling innovation? How might we stop doing silly things? And how might we engage more proactively in things that actually create more market opportunities for breakthrough innovation? We might want to talk about that. The third thing that we work on is that internet policy question, increasingly on issues of cybersecurity, IP protection, issues of digital privacy. There are a lot of questions about the rules of the road on the internet. So those are 3 of the areas that are focusing more specifically around the issues of jobs and job engines, of job creation. I'm also responsible for how to harness these new technologies in the running of government. So my first homework assignment was open government and how we can translate. And then last but not least, I focus on specifically how we can reduce healthcare costs through technology. And in that spirit, it's born out of some of the work we're doing on payment reform and information technology investments. That's the substance. The process is an important one. For those of you in the room, you probably don't think much about Washington because it doesn't quite fit your daily lives, and that's fine. That's totally cool. But there are 3 policy levers that we are now pulling that I think have more direct relevance for the audience. So the how is critical. Number 1, we're much more focused on pre-competitive R&D collaboration. We're making $148 billion a year in investments in R&D, and to the extent that your firms take advantage of that, it's haphazard. Negotiating agreements with universities is sort of stinky and not so easy. So how do we think about that whole engine of R&D and R&D collaboration policy? Second, we're liberating data in unprecedented rates. The federal government has invested billions of dollars in data collection that actually could be the fuel for the next product or service that your firm might want to launch. And we could talk about examples of how companies are taking advantage of that new open data ecosystem. And third, we're engaging much more aggressively in voluntary, industry-driven consensus standards activities. And I'd love to talk about specifics in that area if any of you have interest. But bringing basically the government playing the role of convener, right? Normally you think of government as spending money or issuing laws and decrees. I think in the tech sector, we see this convening role play a much more opportunistic and value-creating function. And then the last piece is, you asked the question about metrics. the work that I don't run an agency with like 1 million employees or anything. It's like basically me, a dozen guys and gals, and I report directly to the president. So in the executive office of the president. So the measure of my success is entirely driven by the president's policy agenda. So as assistant to the president, there are 25 of us that hold that title. We meet every morning in the Roosevelt Room of the West Wing, and we go through all the major issues that are going to come before the president. And my job is to make sure that technology, data, and innovation are thoughtfully engaged on those policy issues from all kinds of topics of public safety all the way through. So the not so cool way of measuring a success is whether or not I'm achieving what the president asked of me. Right. And then for each specific initiative, we obviously have some goals and metrics we can talk about as we go through. So that's a longer answer to the question, but
that's
terrific. Some background.
Just as a setup for everyone in the audience, my predisposition in this forum is to get things going like this, because as you can see, Aneesh is very shy and it's hard to get things out of him. Yeah. With that in mind, get your questions going in and around these areas, because in the not too distant future, I'm going to start asking you guys to participate, because I know what's on his mind to a certain extent, and I know the things that I would like to know, but I don't know what you want to know. So please start to be, or think about that right now. With regard to innovation in America, where are we?
Yes.
And given the context of this audience and what you know about it, what might you invite people here to hear from you? Yes. And you know, so where do you think we are? Yes. And what do you think people here could be doing to help?
Well, number one, I'm here in large part because I want to engage. Okay, I want to listen more than lecture, so the format engaging is very important. But let me begin on the state of the play. There are 6 studies that measure the U.S. rankings on global competitiveness and innovation. And they range from America being number 1 or number 2 down to number 6 and number 8. I'm less interested in the static, where are we? There was a single study that came out 2009 by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, itif.org. It took a look at 25 key performance indicators of innovation, from the supply side, issues like quality of education and the inputs, if you will, of R&D, to some output measures of capital markets and so forth. And these 25 indicators, they indexed across 40 countries around the world: Europe, Asia, Latin America, US. And the finding that, so you asked me, how are we doing? Mm-hmm. They looked back 10 years and said, okay, here's where all those 40 countries were on these 25 measures. And then they went 10 years forward and said, where are they now? Mm-hmm. And they calculated basically the rate of change, you know, derivative values. And they asked the question, regardless of where you were, how are people performing over the last decade? And the sort of troubling statistic was that the United States ranked 40th out of the 40 countries in the rate of change. Mm-hmm. So again, you may not care specifically, well, we're still the greatest country on earth and we're awesome and that's great. That's a static question about where we are. Mm-hmm. But when you ask the questions about where the puck may be heading, the Gretzky question, this study gave me pause. Now, I'm an optimist by my disposition, so I have great confidence in the American economy, as does our president. Mm-hmm. But when you kind of look sort of at this derivative question and the rate of change, we've got to get that engine moving again. So that's why the president in September of 2009 published a strategy for American innovation. Just by a simple show of hands, have any of you heard of our strategy for American innovation? Yeah, only the Piper guy, the lawyer. Mm. So we published this, not to make negative comments about the media, but the day the president released this, he gave a hug to Governor Patterson of New York, and there was some news speculation about whether he was supposed to run for re-election or not. And the headline in the New York Times was the picture of the president hugging him, and then all this political speculation about whatever. And like not even a byline of the fact that, well, the president was actually at a community college to unveil this long-term economic roadmap for the American economy, whatever. Right. And then we released a revised version of the strategy 2 weeks ago. I wrote an op-ed with my colleagues, Gene Sperling, who's the president's economic advisor, as well as Austin Goolsbee, who chairs the Council of Economic Advisors. The three of us wrote an op-ed basically describing the same strategy, mm-hmm. refreshed with what the key priorities are for the president. We can get into that substantively if you're interested. So the president clearly has a long-term vision for how to correct this engine of innovation, which, as I said earlier, looks like the rate of change isn't as it should be. And we've outlined a series of discrete policy initiatives, some requiring resources and some that tap into spirit of collaboration. And that is the blueprint by which I do my job.
Terrific. I want to come back to the ask, if you will, and particularly within the context of Startup America, which I think is an important initiative and one that I know you're passionate about. And I have a lot of interest in personally as well. But you mentioned also as part of your beat, if you will, the cybersecurity agenda.
Yes.
And so
that's in that internet policy bucket.
Yeah. So within that context, obviously there's all this great potential associated with the internet and openness and data being moved all around and all this kind of stuff. There are a lot of downside risks as well.
Absolutely.
So would you comment on that briefly, and then maybe move on and sort of into your areas of interest around what's happening in healthcare and personal identity and things like that? Because I think it can give people a sense of the constructive things that you are doing and the president wants to have happen that we can all participate in. Because I think if you look at the simple frame of reference that you either lead, follow, or get out of the way, I think the government and Aneesh are leading very aggressively in certain areas. Doesn't always break through in the news, as you point out, so people can hear it here firsthand. But there's also a really big agenda about getting out of the way as appropriate. So, and I think that's important in the current sort of news climate, which is big government, but in fact, I think the philosophies and the operating principles you have are very different. So would you talk about both security and then privacy?
I don't mean to scare people, but I think it's important for you on behalf of your corporations to understand, even if you don't necessarily know the issues of cybersecurity, as more and more of your business lines revolve around connectivity and networking, I just want to begin by saying the threats are real, okay? And I'm just going to give you one shocking example. Eric Schmidt, who's the CEO of Google, chairs the president's Innovation and Technology Advisory Council. It's one of the external independent advisors to the president. And we held a 2.5-hour, 3-hour session in June of last year. The video is online. It's riveting. But we actually invited basically the top 35 under 35 researchers in America, like, hot young stars that are just doing breakthrough work, and asking them to sort of tell us what's the future going to look like. And it was just a fascinating conversation about what the future might hold. And a professor from a university said, let me tell you about the cybersecurity threat. And he didn't name the product, but a medical device that is implanted that basically has the ability for a doctor to send a message to sort of shock your heart back into life if, in fact, you have a bit of a heart attack. This is saving people's lives and an incredible innovation in American healthcare, the category of products. He was successfully able to hack the system and send what he called kill command. Okay? Now, this is a certified product that is deemed safe.
Right.
And I don't mean to scare people, but well, yeah, I do.
But don't get a pacemaker, whatever you do.
But what I mean to say is, as more and more of our products and services rely on network connections, okay, we have to take this threat seriously. This is not just a bunch of, Eastern European hackers stealing your email, your credit card data and spoofing you on email to like give up your passwords or something. So these things are increasingly part of our product portfolio. So, okay, scary threat aside, by the way, I'm not as nearly cool at the threat as General Alexander, who's our colleague who runs the National Security Council. And he's a little bit more, get the brass and the stuff on it. Let me tell you. So, okay, having said that, there is a fundamental question about both the technological capacity of the country to protect our networks, that's my lane, and then a broader policy debate about how government should engage in this issue. And Congress is sort of like 50 bills in Congress about what to do with the rules of the road on cybersecurity and so forth. I will keep my remarks on this issue of the technical questions. So in the same policy of government as convener, we held a workshop last year with 1/3 of the attendees from the private sector, 1/3 of them from the university community, and 1/3 of them from government. and we challenged them to say, what are the breakthrough technology questions that as a country we should grapple with, not like in the next month, but over the next 5, 10 years? What are the big questions? And we came up with 3. And we're putting resources. The president's introduced budget kind of puts hundreds of millions of dollars behind this from an R&D standpoint. But basically, say 3. Number 1, our current theory of the case for cybersecurity is basically build a perimeter defense, right? Create a wall. Bad actors will try to break into the wall, and we'll constantly revise the wall and patch it with new patches to protect. So theory of the case, you know, like make a strong moat. I think that's kind of a losing game because the bad guys are constantly going to try to bust into the moat. And so the question is, what happens if you change the game and actually said, no, 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 we want a moving target defense. Let them in, but neutralize their effect. So we got a whole army of folks thinking about that question technically, scientifically, and that's an area of interest. Second, the internet itself can be a platform of an internet on top of an internet, a secure nature that rides a more trusted and secure framework built on the same IP protocols. I'm going to come back to that because that's the question you asked me momentarily about trusted identity. And we call that tailored, trustworthy spaces. And again, we're putting resources, not only resources, we're delivering, and I'll maybe, forgive me for lecturing, but I'll do one piece of this. And then the third question is an economic one. There were lawyers in the room. It's the question, how do we establish an insurance market for this? And what are the economics of understanding the risk in a world where, frankly, not a lot of folks who are building product really know the degree to which their products contain some of these risks? So some of that's more of, you know, economic assessment than it is scientific, but it's important. Let me get to this middle one, though, because it's an example of kind of what we can do in government as convener. So healthcare, we had testimony from a physician in November of 2009, primary care doc, who we wanted to hear from regular people, no offense, but not necessarily the lobbyists and the people who like pay lots of folks to show up in DC. We hear a lot from them. We wanted to hear from like regular folks. So this doctor just said, look, I'm sure you're doing great work, and you know, we think it's amazing. You know, he was not drinking from any policy Kool-Aid. He just said, listen, I got a problem. My patient is moving from Virginia to Arizona. My patient is moving to a doctor who happens to have the same software package that I do. And the patient asked me if I could email the record so that all of my records transfer. Okay? There's no button on my software that says email. So the only email I could use is sort of, no offense, Outlook.
Standard, yeah.
Okay?
Right.
So he exported the file, attached it to an email in Outlook, sent it to the doctor imported it, and it worked. Now, while he's testifying, all the lawyers are like, heart attack. This violates every privacy thing in the world. Because the, internet, email, with all due respect, isn't designed with this kind of security in mind.
Bingo.
So he asked the question, when are you guys going to solve this simple problem of email? And I turned to my colleagues and I said, he's absolutely right. We're on this like roadmap of whatever. We got a roadmap for healthcare. I said, hey, we got to solve this problem. So we hired a program manager and we put up a wiki. And we said to the private sector, and ultimately 80 private companies joined, you have 90 days to deliver consensus recommendations on a security spec that allows for safe, secure email where I trust both sides of the equation. I know Aneesh sent it. I know Daniel got it, and it's encrypted in between. Pretty straightforward. It's not like we didn't invent nuclear physics or anything. This is just assembling what's known, but packaging it. And the industry came together and had like its own religious warfare. No, I want it to be SOAP. I want it to be REST, whatever. And so the group came together and said, let's build this on secure SMTP. Right. And long story short, or short story long, they actually came up 90 days after we asked for them to do this, came up with a consensus. 90 days later, shared in an open source reference implementation of 25,000 lines of code, which is not a lot of code, and published that. And 90 days later, there are dozens of companies that have commercialized the spec. The very first commercial transaction happened by a small company in Minnesota called Vision Share that sent a message from the hospital on immunization data to the health department. And the cost differential, this basically internet within an internet, which is just a security layer on top of the basic internet, was able to be implemented at a fixed cost of $495 to the client, 3 hours of work, and they were up and running. As opposed to the thousands upon thousands of dollars and weeks of point-to-point, IT connections that would otherwise, have made this to be, a virtual impossibility. So private sector did all the work. We hired the program manager and the wiki. And that's basically it. I'm being a little bit...
No, but this is a classic example of, I think, the good things that are going on relative to leading, identifying the problem space, listening, to your point, and then framing the issues, and then effectively getting out of the way, which I think is a key mandate that you have and that you're executing on quite well. So speak briefly, if you will, about education, and now I'm going to start to invite people in. We've got about another 20+ minutes, so I'm assuming there's interest in the audience given the ground we've covered. So I don't know where the microphones are or if there are any, but let's get them going in a minute, okay?
Thank you, Daniel. So one of my responsibilities under the context of Startup America is to ask the question, what is it that we're doing? If you look at I was at an event yesterday, just a sidebar. McKinsey released this productivity study and basically said if America wants to kind of achieve economic performance akin to what we saw in the 90s and kind of repeat our historical leadership role, we've got to juice up our GDP growth rate, and that is in large part, in their estimation, driven by productivity gains. And what they found was that there are key sectors of the American economy that have been, they used the words, not me, laggards on productivity. And you could just imagine what they are: healthcare sector, our energy sector, and our education sector.
Yeah.
Okay? They identified these sectors. Yeah. And one of the questions is there's a lot of policy in these areas. So they kind of posed the question, sort of a layup for the discussion we're about to have now, what can we do in Washington to create the market conditions that will allow the internet economy, if I use that as a proxy for driving productivity growth, into the sectors of the economy that have had difficulty. So you asked about education. I am like a hawk on health, education, and energy. In education, today we still have the same operating model for 150 years. Teacher and kids, butts and seats, right? It's seat time. Amount of time in classroom to the teacher, and we scale her up or down questions of quality and measurement and assessment. But flip the model a little bit and ask the question, what if we focused on results and you could basically learn at your pace? Imagine if information technology had the ability to unleash, and by the way, we have a case study. DARPA funded a project that actually created a whole new software package for basically novice IT workers. And they basically created an environment, a digital tutor, that understood how you learned and at your pace served up different learning objects to get you to the answer. And it was like a, I don't know, 8-week learning program. The cohort of students that went through this program that had no training in IT before outperformed 7-year veterans who were doing IT networking as a career because they learned better and the results were promising. Mastering a subject in 8 weeks when you're a novice? Now, so the president announced in this strategy for American innovation and our budget that we're going to create an ARPA for education, which is basically taking what DARPA has done in the military and apply that to our educational system, and seeded it with about $90 million as an initial way to catalyze some market activity. But that's just the beginning, because money, I said to you earlier, that's an important thing, but not the entirety of the thing. We're actually today, right now, asking the country for feedback. What should the technical standards be to normalize assessments, whether you're doing a game that's assessing my performance kind of in real time, or like an exam you take at the end of the semester? We need to normalize that assessment data because that's a barrier for applications to enter the educational space, because you don't really know, how do I know that a kid who used the application actually learned anything if you don't have a way to measure and assess and link that up and harmonize that with the overall assessment framework? That will never be accepted by the educational system. So we've got an active technical question on the street. Are there assessment standards that we could harmonize that would allow us to open up the market to new products and services? We see the great potential there. And we had a summit at the Aspen Institute where we invited hundreds of startups to come in, and they told us, for educational technologies, a key powerful asset for us is Support us as we export our new concepts overseas, where they are hyper hungry to buy new products and services because they don't have the same legacy infrastructure that we do as they scale up their learning. So startups in the US would like to link into the president's export initiative so that they can get some tender loving care to get access to new markets, which will hopefully build an evidence base that would allow them to scale back in the US. So we're open to all of this. I've got a CTO in place at the Department of Education named Jim Shelton, McKinsey guy, entrepreneur, former Gates Foundation guy. We're seeding people that are entrepreneurs in residence, Daniel, in health, education, energy, to do this kind of play. That's the spirit with which we're trying to make change. I've lectured, so forgive me.
That's
Should
terrific.
we move
this
to
is good.
dialogue?
I think we can get going there. If there's anything you want to comment on energy, because that's one topic we didn't cover, maybe one more point there, and then we'll go to the questions. Smart
grid. So in my swimming lane, there's a lot of what we're doing in clean energy, which we could talk about in terms of investments in breakthroughs in biofuels and breakthroughs in carbon capture and a bunch of other sort of across the portfolio. I'm happy to talk about those. But in the area of smart grid, we think that basically network economies that we saw in the internet just don't exist in our energy space. If you have if a family of homes in Northern California has solar panels and cloud cover hits, the utility is going to have a surge of demand for power because today those homes are getting it locally and instantly all of them have to draw in. So the power company is sort of like, oh my God, I didn't know we had this surge coming, and they're ill-equipped because there isn't this kind of internet-based two-way feedback. The concepts of information flow in the energy sector are not anywhere near as what we see more broadly in the internet economy. So we're trying to understand, we put a few $1 billion in the Recovery Act went towards this sort of notion of how do we bring more information sharing across with respect to cybersecurity, across the energy sector. And there's a policy question to be asked. How do we create the market conditions that will spur a whole new range of innovative applications, taking that information and helping us drive energy efficiency at the home, in commercial buildings, and the like? So I've been leading a White House-led policy process. We're going to be publishing our findings, and we hope with that a series of initiatives in the president's budget. We did put a significant amount of money into smart grid research hubs. We also put $100 million in wireless questions about how wireless devices can engage the smart grid more to help us be more energy efficient. So we got a whole series of things that we're looking to do in that domain, and be happy to engage further on what you all can do to help contribute to it. But again, health, energy, and education, we think from a very natural and simple perspective, your firms that want to have growth opportunities in those markets, we'd love to engage in a collaborative model through our Startup America framework if it's possible. Great,
and that's the invitation. So let's go with questions. I see one from Jim. Or
speak loudly,
wherever
we'll
the mic
hear
is
you.
good. Okay, yeah, you'll be the. And let's get the mic in the next place where we want it. Okay, good.
Great. I just wanted to thank you for coming out. This is fantastic information. So, on the Startup America, I'm doing some work with the Babson College and entrepreneurship.
They were there.
Yeah, and so, can you tell a little bit more about the goals of that initiative and kind of what it's doing as opposed from policy, but more towards execution?
Thank you. So, Startup America is a public-private partnership. 50% policy questions, 50% execution, I guess is the way I would describe it. We realized early that in the role of government as convener, we might actually encourage firms to come together, small and large, who would naturally want to do goodness in the area of open innovation, but may not be as coordinated or connected or may not feel like they're part of a larger campaign or mission or goal. So we've seeded a nonprofit. When I say seeded, I mean zero tax dollars. I mean just called for it. Invited Steve Case to lead this effort. Steve was announced about 10 days ago as the lead. Carl Schramm from the Kaufman Foundation has been asked, and there'll be other folks, perhaps some of you in this room, perhaps some of you, nearby me, who will be called upon to serve in that context by the private sector for the private sector that has some very simple mission objectives. Identify what works and scale it. Encourage corporate engagement with the entrepreneurial sector, encourage more entrepreneurship education and mentorship programs where appropriate, and to identify regulatory barriers that are getting in the way of success, and basically channeling that input. So the private sector is off and running. When we announced this on day one, you know, we had a number of things that were celebrations by firms that were willing to make some commitments, and there was a few that were early into like just saying, hey, we're already planning on this, let's do something together. But we anticipate anybody who wants to come into this family, this is an open family. So if your firm is thinking about a new and creative idea to tap into universities or entrepreneurs or cities that have had a difficult time tapping into this culture, be they be Detroit or Cleveland or what have you, anything that you think you're doing anyway, but think for purposes of leverage and collaboration would benefit from kind of connecting the dots with some other stakeholders, Steve Case, that team, and they're going to be naming a CEO soon, there's a whole infrastructure there. No mother may I from the government, no requirement for Congress to do anything, no need for cash or procurement or RFP. This is zero complexity. Simple, straightforward, just fun, frankly. People are going to get along, they're going to meet, they're going to engage, and it's kind of cool coming to the White House every now and again. President gets to do some cool things. So there's a little bit of the, you know, let's take advantage of this. So that's my specific ask, which is please engage. And by the way, Steve is leading this externally, but we are in a collaborative model. So I've got staff dedicated to supporting this on, so you know, emails can fly however you want to do it. The other half of this is my job, okay? That is to make sure that we can be effective receptacles to the ideas. Just like the physician who said, clean up the healthcare secure email thing, there are going to be dozens of these things that are random, that I could never imagine are random barriers. But you're going to say, you know, the transportation department's got this rule that makes it really hard for me to do real-time traffic monitoring, blah, blah, blah. So tell me, and I will run those plays to the ground. And that's the spirit by which this collaboration is going to happen. I am, by being an assistant to the president, I am right-hand partners with Cass Sunstein, who's the president's regulatory advisor. Cass has announced specifically, under the president's leadership, initiatives to identify, even for small businesses. So in your open innovation ecosystems, you might have partnerships with small businesses that have a regulatory burden because they're getting into some new sector. Those small businesses are in a position to ask for some regulatory relief, okay, by virtue of being a small business. That's been called for in the law, but no one's ever executed in it for like 20 years. So we're all over this. And that's the key to this, is to say, look, if you want to come up with commitments, join the cause, be on the team. You're all welcome to be on the team. If you have specific areas that you think were bottlenecks, let us know. We have a structured process for gathering that input, but even if you don't want the structured process, just send me the note and I'll filter it accordingly. Let's get some things done, some simple things done that we can execute right away, stuff that requires Congress. It's your call to know how easy or hard it's going to be to do anything in that environment today, but we will pursue any and all of those opportunities.
That's great.
All right, I will be rapid fire in my response.
I see a mic in the back, Bill.
Or whatever, yeah.
Yes, hi, thanks. Bill Reichert with Garage Technology Ventures. We're down in the innovation ecosystem watching as governments try to figure out this innovation problem. We're watching hopefully, but also a little bit worried at the same time. And so one of the conundrums right now is we're looking at what's going on and we say, you know, boy, looks like the Chinese are doing a better job of figuring out this innovation strategy than we are. But that's kind of antithetical. The conundrum is, you know, China's state-based innovation strategy, and that's kind of against what most of us in the room here want to see, right? So from your perspective, what are you seeing that the Chinese are doing right that maybe we can borrow, morph, and adopt? And, you know, at a public policy level, what are the Chinese doing wrong in terms of, you know, what should we say, cheating or doing things that at a sort of global international policy level we shouldn't allow them to do?
That's a very loaded set of questions. I am thankfully, I am not the point person on the administration's policies on China, so without the risk of speaking out of my swimming lane and commenting on matters that have international economic significance, I will speak softly and more thoughtfully about what we're doing and a little bit less on the comparative. Your question had some presumptions in it that I want to correct carefully. Waiting for government is in part a term that freaks me out if you were to say that. because the notion that we're going to have a top-down strategy that you all have to wait for to then go forth and innovate is sort of antithetical to the president's vision for how entrepreneurship happens in this country, which is bottom-up. So nobody should be waiting on anything, okay? Now, if as you're bottom-up developing great ideas, but you're finding barriers because the market conditions are not working, let us know so we can remove the barriers. But if you're sitting here twiddling your thumbs waiting for some like tablet from the president that says, this is the innovation plan, now go, I think you'll be waiting a long time because that's not our philosophy, okay? Now, having said that, there's one dimension of the China equation which I do want to emphasize. I didn't speak to it as much in the conversation. I am, in that internet policy question about what are the rules of the road, intellectual property protection is an incredibly important conversation. And as is readily apparent, I'm not making news on this statement, there are concerns in the US environment that IP protection isn't what it should be in markets like China. So the president has made IP protection a key pillar of our China relationship. I have a deputy in my office who's like basically lives and breathes and thinks international IP and what we can do to get these issues right. What are the nudging, pushing, collaborating rules along the way that can make progress? And by the way, that also applies domestically, okay? We're very much, you might have seen a lot of, I have a colleague of mine, Victoria Espinel, who runs IP enforcement strategy on behalf of the president. Again, this is a bipartisan issue. This was a bill that was passed in the previous Congress before the Obama administration came in. We've just executed on the plan. And in a bipartisan basis, the notion is if we have intellectual property rights, they should be protected. And that should be true domestically and internationally. And we should do more and be as aggressive as possible within the rules of the road today to be successful. So in the China equation, the one piece I would comment on is that we are very focused on working collaboratively with them on IP protection. But generally speaking, we are a bottom-up oriented innovation economy. The role of government we see is in large part investing in the building blocks of innovation, which are R&D, education with emphasis on STEM, infrastructure like the mobility question I just raised, but also our railways, roadways, and runways. It's also about our market rules and conditions that foster more entrepreneurship. And then last but not least, there are a few areas that we believe need an all-hands-on-deck approach that do require a policy intervention and so forth. And I mentioned some of those already, a clean energy economy, reforming our healthcare system powered by IT, and so forth and so on.
There's another mic. Good.
I'll be rapid. I'm filibustering. I'll rapid fire to be respectful of time. Go ahead.
Good.
Thanks, Aneesh. It's really interesting to hear your views. You described in...
You're overseas. What are you doing here, man? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
No, well, it's part of my question, actually. You described, and President Obama described it as a Sputnik moment to outcompete and out-innovate the world. But at the conference here, we've been talking a lot about innovation is global, and there's a lot of talk about partnering and collaboration.
Yes,
and
sir.
I'm just interested in your views about how much you're trying to reach out to our other partners around the world and what that might mean.
So that is one of my responsibilities. I didn't know this when I took the job, but international technological collaboration is sort of in one of my swimming lanes. I'm not a foreign policy expert, so I get tapped in by the various apparati, State Department and the like. So I have engaged with Russia on innovative collaborations. We started with a baby step, which is a program called Text for Baby. Again, the cell phone companies in the US waived all their text message fees to give pregnant moms who'd ask for information 3 relevant messages a week, 100% financed by the private sector, 100% educational materials organized by the Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition. All we did was convene, ask the cell phone companies if they would waive text message fees. 135,000 women in 1 year have enrolled. And firms like Johnson & Johnson have announced their financial commitment to scale that program up to 1 million moms by the end of 2012, okay? And they've also announced that this coalition that supported Text for Baby, which is now 85 organizations, Russia has agreed to basically replicate the model. So again, we don't always have to massively do big scientific complexities. Something as simple as this demonstrates an opportunity to collaborate, okay? So Secretary Clinton announced following our visit to Russia in February of 2010. I think it was in June, she announced that this Text for Baby thing will be a collaboration. I've been to India with the president, where we signed an open government dialogue, where we're going to have some extraordinarily cool projects that will come out. I believe in educational technology, but I don't want to announce them before they're announced, but there are going to be some very exciting initiatives, and we're hoping to launch that program early April, and that will be very, very exciting. It was an official signed agreement between the countries. And then with Nelly Cruz in Europe, we've been engaged very aggressively on how we can collaborate. One of the things we had done is the EU signed a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Health and Human Services for health IT collaboration. So literally, this notion of like sharing your medical data, right now there's no technical framework to say if you're traveling from the US to Europe and you want your medical records accessible, you can't even allow for that. There's no framework for that, and vice versa. So we signed this MOU to say let's do something tangible in that domain, with more to come.
Yeah, follow up on that. I have a startup IT company in healthcare, and we reduce costs by 15%, which seems to be popular.
You'll give me your
days.
card afterwards, yes.
Yes. But I actually need a favor from you, because we interact with, try to interact with 400 different EMR systems that are out there now.
Yes.
And the
sucks.
Well, it sucks because I know the taxonomy is coming in the next couple of years.
No,
but
I'll tell you more. Go ahead.
Okay, I need a 90-day solution right now. So I went and talked to Epic, and they have a vendor relations group whose job is not to talk to any other vendors. They told me that.
Okay.
So if you could help us out by having some short-term things, that would be most helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, cool.
I want to be careful. My short-term things does not mean strong-arming any firms.
Yeah, right.
So let me be careful about that.
Give me the 90 days.
I get it.
Let's go on to questions.
No, let me answer this question briefly, though. This question of taxonomy is very, very important. The president tasked his Council of Advisors for Science and Technology to produce a methodology that has basically the merits that it can be accomplished in our lifetime. I mean, this is a hard issue, right? This is not like we've solved this. This taxonomy for healthcare data is really complicated. So they published a report. You can just Google PCAST or Bing. PCAST Health IT report, okay? And it's a short read. It's
your favorite search engine.
It's a 60 to 70 page document. And there are public hearings yesterday and today, or no, Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, to like dig into this question. Because they, in 90 days, have to produce a report, which will be by March, on what the rules of the road should be to create the market conditions to encourage the kind of taxonomy sharing. So your input to the PCAST, go to healthit.hhs.gov and present your views about what the rules of the road should be on this issue of taxonomies, because they're going to issue a public report back to the administration, because we've got almost $28 billion in Recovery Act funds that are ruled by a concept called meaningful use. And so vendors like Epic and others who want to participate in the program have to meet the rules. And so the question is, what should the rules be in 2013 and 2015 that reflect on this issue of sharing of data? And that's an important question, because we have to produce those rules this year. Sure. Others?
Wherever the mic is.
Yeah. Bring it.
Susan
Yes, ma'am.
Lucas Conwell from SD Forum, which is the largest not-for-profit in Silicon Valley, helping professionals in emerging technologies. We just held a full-day conference on the global water crisis. When you spoke about energy, you spoke about the smart grid.
Yes.
And there were 10 countries present, including a former state senator from California, talking about how water is really the next oil, and how technology and innovation can help solve and develop, solve the problems for the global water situation. I wondered if in your energy vision you could talk about water.
So let me answer it slightly differently. One of the key responsibilities that I have is this notion of open government, which is a cross-cutting and horizontal framework that applies to every federal agency by the president's call. Open government includes basically a few key policy levers. One is transparency, information about a subject matter that we hold that should be released to the public. Participation, which is how do we get people's voices in our policy process so we can be more thoughtful about how we render rules and judgments. And third, this notion of collaboration. How do we tap into this entrepreneurial ecosystem to bring about new products and services that will invent our way out of these long-standing problems? In that last category, in December, Congress gave us the authority for implementing prizes, challenges, and competitions to spur new ideas and breakthroughs, and that policy can be applied by any federal agency. Usually the DoD had that authority under DARPA. We've now scaled that to every federal agency. I give you that background because water is a top priority for USAID. And USAID, in this spirit of innovation, has launched a series of modest venture initiatives using existing dollars but repurposed, called Global Development Innovation Ventures. And it's run by a woman named Maura O'Neill, who herself is an entrepreneur from Seattle. And they're all over this question. So they may or may not have a water focus for one of their future solicitations or their priorities. But if you go to usaid.gov/open, every federal agency /open, you'll see their commitments to being more open and collaborative. And I am 98% confident something in the water space will be in that domain to try to get some ideas flowing. You can also visit challenge.gov, where we are organizing this sort of simple IT infrastructure so that any federal agency can communicate with your companies so that you can see, hey, there's $1 million prize for ideas that have to do with this clean energy issue or water issue, what have you. And you should all visit challenge.gov or subscribe to the feed. There's an API there so that your own ecosystem can understand when and how. By the way, one of the coolest things that I've learned in challenge.gov is corporations have employees that didn't ask their bosses, but they participate in challenge.gov initiatives, which is very cool.
It's a good thing.
Okay.
I know there are a lot more questions, but we are out of time. And so let us join me, please, in thanking Aneesh.